Hey, I'm Claire Solomon, Akashic Records practitioner, business strategist, and astrology and human design nerd. And this is the Kinda Cosmic podcast, down-to-earth chats about out-of-this-world stuff. We'll talk Akashic insight, astrology, star seeds, cosmic intel, soul purpose, and all the strange, beautiful ways the universe shows up in everyday life. No fluff, just real talk about being a soul in a human body. Well, hi. Today we are going to talk about Chiron. And I want to start by asking you something a little personal. And that is, have you ever been genuinely good at helping somebody through something? Like you knew exactly what to say. You could hold the weight of the thing with them. You understood the layers of what they were feeling and what they were going through. And you later realized it was because you had been through a version of that thing yourself, or the same energy thread of a similar thing. That your understanding of how to help them came not from studying something or reading a book about it, but from actually having lived a version of it, from the long, sometimes uncomfortable and very messy process of working through it in your own life. That is Chiron, and today we're going to talk about it. Now, Chiron is one of these things in astrology that can make people a little nervous when they first hear about it, because the word wound gets thrown around and nobody particularly loves being told that their birth chart has a massive wound in it, right? So before we go anywhere, I really want to reframe that completely, because understanding your Chiron is honestly some of the most validating, clarifying, oh, that's why this thing is like this, information you'll ever find in your own chart. This is not a here's what's wrong with you conversation. It's actually the opposite of that. So let's start with the mythology of it first, because the story is actually beautiful and it holds so much of the meaning. In Greek mythology, Chiron was a centaur. And if you know your mythology, centaurs were generally known for being wild and chaotic and not particularly great to be around. But Chiron was completely different from the others. He was born to the Titan Cronus and a sea nymph called Philyra, which put him in a totally separate lineage to the other centaurs, and it clearly showed. Where they were rowdy and untamed, Chiron was wise, gentle, deeply civilized. He became a healer, a teacher, a mentor. Chiron taught healing, herbalism, astrology, music, the lot. Like, he was extraordinary. And yet, in an accidental moment during some chaotic battle, Chiron was struck by an arrow, by a poison arrow. And here is the paradox that the mythology has been setting up all along. Chiron, the greatest healer of his age, could not heal this wound from this poison arrow. The poison was fatal. But because he was immortal, it also could not kill him. So he simply carried it. He carried this wound that would never fully close. This pain that he was never fully free from. So here you have this being who was actually twice wounded, once at birth, rejected by his parents and an outcast who didn't really belong anywhere, and again by the arrow. And yet, what did Chiron do with all of this? He turned it into the most profound healing work. He gave to others precisely the things he himself most needed. And that paradox of you don't need to have fully resolved your wound to be able to help somebody else through a version of it, is what Chiron represents in your birth chart. And here's something I find really fascinating, especially in the context of the Akashic Records work I do, because Chiron wounds are rarely just a this lifetime thing. What I see consistently in readings is that the Chiron wound, the flavor of it, the theme of it, has its roots often in the most recent few past lives. It arrives into this one already baked in, already pre-programmed via our birth chart, already tender before you have done a single thing to earn it in this lifetime. Which is why it can feel so inexplicably yours, so deep and so old and so hard to trace to any particular event. And it's often because the origin point wasn't in this lifetime. It came in with you, but it came in with you for a reason, to be seen, worked with, and ultimately turned into something useful. So in your birth chart, Chiron's placement gives you really specific clues about the nature of this wound and where it lives in your life. And there are a few layers to reading it, each one getting more specific, which you know me, I love the details. The first layer is the sign that Chiron is in your chart. And something important to understand before you run off and look yours up, Chiron moves very slowly through the zodiac, and it stays in one sign for anywhere between 4 to 8 years, depending on where it is in its orbit, which means everyone born in the same window as you, same 4, 5, 6 years, will likely have Chiron in the exact same sign. So the sign is relevant and real, but it's more of a generational or collective wound, something that a whole era of people is working through together rather than something personally specific to just you. For example, those of us with Chiron in Taurus, Taurus being the sign of worth and values, what we build and how we contribute, we carry this collective undercurrent of, am I actually valued? Will what I create ever be enough? And if you're in that age bracket, you're probably nodding right now. So the sign is the broad kind of weather, right? Interesting context, but not specific enough on its own. And this is where the next layer, the house that your Chiron is in, becomes really important. The house your Chiron falls in narrows things down to an area of life. While a whole generation might share your Chiron sign, far fewer will have it in the same house as you. And the house tells you exactly where this wound plays out most tangibly in your lived experience. My own Chiron is in Taurus, but it's sitting in my 11th house, which is the house of community and social impact and belonging within a wider group. And the Taurus layer on top of that adds something specific. It's not just, do I belong? It's, am I actually valued here? Is it safe to be fully myself in this particular space? And if I show up, will I actually be received? So that combination creates this particular flavor of wound where even when you are technically included, even when you are in the room or within the group, there's this quiet feeling of not fully relaxing into being seen, of either holding yourself back just a little or even overproving to kind of justify your place, right? Of being on the outside looking in, even when you're actually on the inside. So I can trace that feeling through so many chapters of my life, working in advertising in a corporate world that was very much not designed for people wired the way that I'm wired, being in it technically, but never quite feeling like my actual value was landing in those spaces, toning myself down to fit, like rather than bringing the real thing. And in my Akashic Records work, I can clearly see how that pattern has roots that go well beyond this lifetime of mine. It already arrived quite tender, preloaded from the most recent life, certainly before this one and a few before that. And now to the layer that I love to take it to as part of my Soul Codes framework. If you have access to your gene keys or human design chart, you can take your Chiron one layer deeper and look at the specific gate that Chiron occupies. And this is where it gets so incredibly precise and honestly the most validating part of all. For me, my Chiron sits in gate 8, which I call the authentic rebel. The shadow expression of the authentic rebel includes things like feeling purposeless, struggling to identify your unique contribution for the world, a constant low hum of worry about whether you are expressing yourself authentically or just like defaulting to what everyone else seems to want from you. And when I first mapped this out in this specific context, something clicked completely for me, because that exact thing, figuring out what my unique expression actually was, had been my whole arc all along, my obsession in the best possible way for years. The higher expression of Gate 8, the authentic rebel at its full potential, is being a role model for authenticity, encouraging others to find and express their own unique selves, being valued specifically for just being entirely who you are, which, if you know my work at all, is basically the whole brief, right? The wound became the work that I do. The higher expression of this placement as a whole, what it's pointing me toward, is creating and holding spaces where people feel genuinely safe and valued, where the ones who have always felt a bit other and outsider can actually be themselves, right? Now, let me give you a second example so you can feel how different the texture can be even with the same Chiron sign. Say somebody else has Chiron in Taurus, the same generational placement, but theirs sits in their 12th house. The 12th house is the house of the unconscious, the hidden realms, the deep spiritual dimensions of life stuff, and the things that live beneath the surface of everyday experience. So this person isn't primarily experiencing the Taurus worth wound through community and visibility like I am. Their version of it is much more inward and much more private. It might show up as a quiet, like spiritual disconnection that they can't name, or a feeling of never feeling like they can fully access a sense of belonging to something greater than themselves. Or perhaps a fear that they aren't spiritual enough, or that they're doing spirituality wrong somehow, that the divine isn't available to them in the way that it seems to be available to others. Or it can show up as this deep sense of isolation that's kind of hard to articulate or explain to anyone else. Like they carry something that others can't see and therefore can never quite fully meet them in. But let's take that one layer deeper to the gate and say this person's Chiron sits in gate 27, which I call the nurtured caregiver. The shadow expression of the nurtured caregiver is all around giving endlessly while being quietly unable to receive the same care back. Overgiving to the point of complete depletion, right? A deep, often unconscious belief that being looked after is not for them, that asking for care might be selfish, or that they must earn their place through constant giving. And with Taurus in the mix of this, there's this fear underneath all of that of, will I actually ever be safe enough to stop giving and just rest? The higher expression of Gate 27, of the nurtured caregiver at its best, is open-hearted, sustainably generous care that flows in both directions. Someone who can receive as graciously as they give, who nourishes others not from this place of depletion, but from actual overflow, right? But they can only get there by doing the uncomfortable work of actually letting themselves be cared for. The wound is the block to receiving, and the healing is learning to let that in. Same Chiron sign as mine, completely different house, completely different gate, 3 layers deep, and we've arrived at something that's specific to you. And here's what I come back to every time with Chiron. The point is not to fully heal the wound. That may never happen, and that's genuinely okay. Just like Chiron in the mythology, he never healed his wound either. The point is to just be one step ahead of it, just one, because the person who is one step behind you on that exact kind of thing or feeling or energy or experience, you are already equipped to meet them there because you're just literally half to one step ahead. Your deepest wound is also your greatest wisdom, not as like a consolation prize, but the actual design of it. So if you want to play with this after today, here is where I would suggest you start. Look up where Chiron sits in your chart. You can pull up a free chart anywhere, any astrology software. Find your house placement first because that's your most personal and specific layer without needing any extra things. And then just sit with the question, what is the thing in that area of life that has felt like a recurring kind of tender spot, something that surfaces again and again that you maybe can't fully explain from this lifetime alone. Like there's no real logical, tangible proof of why you should feel this kind of feeling, right? Because the moment you shine a light on it, it's already has less power of you. That's genuinely how this works. That is what allows you to take those 1/2 and 1 steps forward just by illuminating the knowledge around it. And if you want to go deeper and see exactly how your Chiron, your house, your specific gate all weave together into the fuller picture, that's exactly what we map out inside the Soul Codes program, particularly in the Healing Codes module. And it's one of those pieces where people consistently have that big, oh, so that's why kind of moment. And it really, honestly, shifts how they see themselves in the best possible way. So if that sounds like a great next step for you, I will pop the link in the show notes. And that's it for today's Kinda Cosmic Chat. Find more soul-aligned guidance at clairesolomon.com.